Right now, somewhere out there, someone is living a story just like this. But tonight, it's your turn to hear it. Make yourself comfortable, but not too comfortable. And don't forget to support the channel with a like and a sub while you still can. Story 1. The Last Shift. I never thought a place as bright and bustling as the Eastview Mall could harbor something so dark. My name is Emily, and I was 19, working part-time at a small clothing boutique on the second floor to pay for college. The mall, located in a quiet suburban town, was the kind of place where families shopped, teens hung out, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. It was all fluorescent lights, soft pop music, and the hum of escalators. But after what happened during my last shift, I'll never set foot in a mall again. It was a Thursday night in late October, the air outside crisp with the promise of Halloween. The mall was open until 9 p.m., but by 8:30 it was practically deserted. Most stores were already pulling down their gates, and the only sounds were the distant clatter of a janitor's cart and the faint music looping overhead. I was closing up alone that night. My manager, Sarah, had left early for a family thing, leaving me to lock up. I didn't mind. I'd done it dozens of times. Count the cash, tidy the racks, shut off the lights, and pull down the metal gate. Simple. As I was folding a stack of sweaters near the register, I noticed the lights in the main corridor flicker. Just a quick stutter, like a blink. I glanced out through the glass storefront, but the mall was empty. The flickering stopped, and I shrugged it off. Old wiring, maybe. Malls like Eastview were built in the 80s, and they weren't exactly known for modern tech. I went back to my work, humming to drown out the eerie silence. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the back of the store near the fitting rooms. I froze, my hands hovering over a pile of jeans. The boutique wasn't huge, just a long, narrow space with racks on either side and 6 fitting rooms tucked in the back corner. The tapping came again, sharper this time, like someone was deliberately rapping on the mirror inside one of the stalls. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small in the empty store. No answer. I grabbed the keys from the counter, my heart picking up speed. Probably just a customer who'd wandered in and gotten locked in a fitting room. It happened sometimes. People hid to try on clothes after hours, thinking they wouldn't get caught. Annoying, but not a big deal. I walked toward the fitting rooms, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above me. The tapping stopped as I approached, which made my stomach twist. "Is someone there?" I asked, louder this time. Still nothing. I checked each stall, pushing open the doors one by one. Empty, empty, empty. The mirrors reflected my pale face back at me, my brown hair messy from a long shift. I was about to turn away when I noticed something in the last mirror. It was faint, like a smudge, but it wasn't a smudge. It was a handprint, small like a child's, pressed against the inside of the glass as if someone had been trapped inside the mirror itself. I stepped closer, my breath catching. The handprint wasn't there when I'd cleaned the mirrors earlier. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the glass. It was ice cold, colder than it should have been in a heated store. I yanked my hand back, my skin prickling. Then the tapping started again, behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The store was empty, the racks still, the lights steady. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead despite the chill. I told myself I was imagining things. Long shifts, late nights, and too much caffeine could do that to you. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, ready to call security, but the screen was black, dead. I'd charged it an hour ago. "Okay, Emily, calm down," I whispered to myself, heading back to the counter. I'd lock up and get out. Whatever this was, I didn't want to deal with it alone. But as I reached the register, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The gate was down. The heavy metal shutter that separated the store from the mall corridor was fully closed, locking me inside. I hadn't touched it. I ran to the gate, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was on the outside and I didn't have the key. Sarah had taken it with her. Panic clawed at my chest. I banged on the metal, shouting, "Hey, is anyone out there? I'm stuck." My voice echoed, but no one answered. The mall was dead silent. Story 2. The Man in the Food Court. My name is Marcus, and I used to work security at the Riverdale Mall, a sprawling complex just outside the city. It was one of those places that felt like a small town. 3 floors of shops, a massive food court, and a parking lot that could swallow your car if you weren't paying attention. I'd been on the job for 2 years, patrolling the corridors, breaking up teenage fights and escorting drunk shoppers to their cabs. It was mind-numbing work, but it paid the bills. That is, until the night I saw the man in the food court. After that, I quit and never looked back. It was a slow Tuesday in February, the kind of night where the mall felt like a ghost town by 7 p.m. The stores were still open, but the crowds had thinned to a trickle, just a few stragglers buying last-minute gifts or grabbing dinner. I was on my usual rounds, my boots echoing on the polished tiles, my flashlight swinging lazily at my side. The food court was my last stop before a coffee break. It was a wide-open space with tables scattered under a massive skylight, the smell of fried food lingering in the air. Most of the vendors had already closed, their metal shutters down, leaving only a taco stand and a smoothie kiosk still serving. As I approached, I noticed a man sitting alone at a table in the center of the court. He was facing away from me, his head bowed, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. Nothing unusual, people often lingered after eating, but something about him made my skin prickle. Maybe it was the way he sat, perfectly still, not eating, not scrolling on a phone, just staring down at the table. I glanced at my watch, 8:45 p.m. The mall would close soon and I'd need to clear him out. "Hey, sir," I called, keeping my tone friendly but firm. "Mall's closing in 15. Time to wrap it up." He didn't move, didn't even flinch. I stepped closer, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my belt. "Sir, you hear me?" Still nothing. The food court was dead quiet, the hum of the smoothie blender gone, the taco vendor now wiping down his counter. I could feel the hairs on my neck stand up. I walked around the table to face him, keeping a safe distance. He was older than I'd thought, maybe in his 50s, with greasy, thinning hair poking out from under his hood. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, God, his eyes. They were wide open, staring straight ahead, but they weren't focused on anything. Like he was looking through the table, through the floor, through the world itself. His hands were flat on the table, fingers splayed, and I noticed a faint tremor in them, like he was struggling to stay still. "You okay, sir?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Something was wrong, really wrong. He didn't answer, but his head twitched slightly, like he'd heard me but couldn't respond. I glanced at the taco vendor who was watching from behind his counter, his eyes wide. I motioned for him to stay put and took another step closer. That's when I saw it. Under the table where his legs should have been, there was nothing. Not in a metaphorical way, no legs, no feet, just empty space where his lower half should have been. My stomach lurched and I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The sound echoed, sharp and loud, and the man's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. They weren't empty anymore. They were black, like pools of ink, and they seemed to pull me in like I was falling into them. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but it felt like forever. Then he smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of his lips that showed too many teeth. "You see me," he whispered, his voice low and raspy, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside the earth. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move, backing away toward the taco stand. The vendor was gone now, his counter abandoned, the lights in the food court flickering like they were about to die. I grabbed my radio and hit the call button. "Base, this is Marcus. I need backup in the food court now." Static. No response. I tried again, my hands shaking. "Base, do you copy?" Nothing but white noise. The man was still sitting there watching me, his smile wider now, his head tilted at an angle that didn't look human. I turned to run, my boots slipping on the tiles, but the food court seemed to stretch, the exits getting farther away with every step. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, he was standing. Not sitting, standing, right in front of me, even though I'd put at least 20 feet between us. His lower half was still gone, his torso just floating there, his black eyes boring into mine. "You see me," he said again, louder this time, and the air around me turned cold like I'd stepped into a freezer. My breath came out in clouds, and I could feel my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I don't remember deciding to run. It was like my body took over, my legs pumping as I sprinted toward the nearest exit. The mall corridors twisted around me, the familiar layout suddenly wrong, like I was in a maze. Storefronts blurred past, their gates down, their lights off, but I swore I saw faces in the glass, pale, eyeless faces pressed against the windows, watching me. I finally reached the main entrance, the glass doors locked for the night. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, not normal footsteps, but a wet, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I finally got the door open and stumbled into the parking lot, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. When I turned around, the mall was dark. Every light, every sign, every storefront, black, like it had been abandoned for years. I ran to my car, got in, and drove straight home, not stopping until I was locked inside my apartment. I called my boss the next morning and quit, no explanation. He didn't ask for one. A week later, I heard from a coworker that the taco vendor had quit too. He told people he saw a man in the food court that night, a man with no legs, sitting at a table. No one believed him. They said he was stressed, overworked, imagining things. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see those black eyes staring into me, and I hear that voice whispering, "You see me." I don't go to malls anymore. I don't trust them. And if you're ever in a food court late at night, don't look too closely at the people sitting alone. You might see something you can't unsee. Story 3. The elevator that wasn't there. My name is Sarah, and I'm a single mom who used to work as a barista at a coffee shop in the Crestwood Mall. It was a decent gig, decent hours, free coffee, and enough tips to cover the bills while I raised my 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The mall itself was nothing special, just your typical 2-story sprawl with a mix of chain stores, a movie theater, and a food court that always smelled like pizza. I'd worked there for 3 years, long enough to know every corner, every escalator, every shortcut through the service corridors. But what happened in that elevator last summer changed everything. I still wake up sweating, thinking about it. It was a humid July evening, and I was finishing a double shift. The mall was closing at 9 p.m., and by 8:45 the place was nearly empty. I was wiping down the espresso machine when my coworker, Jake, offered to close up so I could get home to Lily. My babysitter had already texted me twice, saying Lily was fussy and asking when I'd be back. I thanked Jake, grabbed my purse, and headed out, cutting through the mall to the parking garage. Crestwood had 2 main elevators near the east entrance, glass-walled and reliable, though they always smelled faintly of cleaning solution. I pressed the call button and waited, scrolling through my phone to check Lily's babysitter's latest message. The elevator dinged, the doors slid open, and I stepped inside without looking up. The doors closed, and I pressed the button for the parking level, expecting the familiar hum as it descended. But it didn't descend. The elevator lurched upward, the motion so sharp it made my stomach flip. I frowned, glancing at the panel. I definitely pressed P1 for the parking garage, but the light for the 3rd floor was glowing. The mall only had 2 floors. I pressed P1 again, harder this time, but the elevator kept climbing, the numbers on the display flickering. 1, 2, then a blank screen. My heart started to race. I hit the emergency button, but nothing happened. No alarm, no voice from security, just silence. The elevator stopped with a jolt and the doors opened. I expected to see the parking garage or maybe a maintenance floor, but what I saw made no sense. It was a corridor, long and narrow, with dim fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The walls were bare concrete, stained with dark patches that looked like mold, or something worse. The air was cold, damp, and smelled like rust and decay, nothing like the polished, air-conditioned mall I knew. There were no signs, no store logos, just an endless hallway stretching into the distance. I stepped out, my sneakers echoing on the cracked floor. "Hello," I called, my voice swallowed by the stillness. I turned back to the elevator, but the doors were already closing. I lunged for the button, but it was too late. The elevator was gone, leaving a blank concrete wall where it had been. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. Elevators didn't just disappear. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but the screen showed no signal. The battery, which had been at 60% a minute ago, was now at 5%. I cursed under my breath and started walking, hoping to find a stairwell or an exit. The corridor seemed to go on forever, the lights buzzing and flickering, casting long shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't have. Every few steps, I heard a faint sound, like a whisper, too soft to make out but close enough to make my skin crawl. After what felt like 10 minutes, I reached a door. It was heavy, metal, and rusted, with a small, foggy window. I peered through it and saw what looked like a department store, but not one I recognized from Crestwood. The shelves were packed with clothes, but they were old-fashioned, dresses and suits from decades ago, covered in dust. Mannequins stood in awkward poses, their plastic faces blank, their heads tilted slightly as if watching me. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. The air was thicker here, heavy with the smell of mildew. The lights were dim, and the store was silent except for a faint hum, like a refrigerator running. I moved deeper, my heart pounding, looking for a way out. That's when I saw her, a woman standing at the far end of the aisle, facing away from me. She was tall, wearing a long, tattered dress that dragged on the floor. Her hair was matted, hanging in clumps, and she was swaying slightly, like she was listening to music only she could hear. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" She didn't turn around. Instead, she stopped swaying, her body going rigid. Then, slowly, she began to turn, her movements jerky like a puppet on strings. When I saw her face, I screamed. Her eyes were gone, just empty sockets, black and hollow. Her mouth was stretched wide, too wide, showing rows of jagged teeth. She didn't speak, but a low, guttural sound came from her throat, like a growl mixed with a sob. I ran, knocking over a rack of clothes, the hangers clattering to the floor. The store seemed to twist around me, the aisles shifting, the mannequins turning their heads as I passed. I could hear her behind me, her dress dragging, her footsteps uneven but fast. I found another door and burst through it back into the corridor. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of voices overlapping, saying things I couldn't understand but felt in my bones, words like stay and hours. I kept running, my lungs burning, until I saw another elevator at the end of the hall. Its doors were open, the light inside warm and inviting. I didn't think, I just dove in and slammed the close button. The doors shut just as I heard her footsteps reach the threshold, that horrible growl echoing in my ears. The elevator hummed to life, descending this time, and when the doors opened, I was back in the parking garage, right where I'd meant to go. I stumbled out, gasping, and checked my phone. It was 9:05 p.m., only 20 minutes since I'd left the coffee shop, but it felt like hours. My car was where I'd parked it, and I drove home shaking, tears streaming down my face. When I got to my apartment, Lily was asleep, and the babysitter said everything was fine. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The next day, I called in sick and never went back to Crestwood Mall. I heard from Jake later that they'd found an old service elevator in the East Wing, one that hadn't been used in years, boarded up behind a wall. Story 4. The store that never closed. My name is Daniel, and I used to be a stock clerk at a big box electronics store in the Pine Ridge Mall. It was a typical retail job, stacking shelves, unpacking boxes, dealing with customers who thought I knew how to fix their laptops. The mall was one of those sprawling, aging complexes, built in the early 90s with a mix of high-end boutiques and discount chains. It had seen better days, but it was still busy enough, especially on weekends. I worked the night shift, restocking after closing, and I liked the quiet. Or at least, I did until the night I found the store that wasn't supposed to be there. It was a chilly November night, and I was working late, around 11 p.m. The mall had closed at 9, and the main lights were off, leaving only the emergency fluorescents casting a dim, bluish glow over the corridors. My coworker, Raj, had called out sick, so it was just me and a pile of boxes in the back room. The store was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the building settling. I was used to it. The mall always felt a little eerie after hours, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. I was hauling a cart of TV boxes to the floor when I heard music. Not the usual mall music, but something older, like a warped vinyl record playing a big band tune, all brassy and distorted. It was faint, coming from somewhere outside the store. I figured one of the other shops had left a radio on, happened sometimes when employees forgot to shut things down. I ignored it and kept working, but the music didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, the notes warping into something almost dissonant like a song played underwater. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out into the main corridor, locking the store behind me. The mall was a maze of shadows, the storefronts dark, their gates down. The music seemed to be coming from the West Wing, a less trafficked part of the mall where a few stores had closed over the years. I followed the sound, my sneakers squeaking on the polished tiles, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The music led me to a storefront I didn't recognize. It was tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a vape shop, a narrow space with a sign that read Melody's Emporium in faded gold letters. The gate was up, and warm, flickering lights spilled out, like the glow of old incandescent bulbs. I'd walked this corridor hundreds of times, and I'd never seen this store before. The bookstore had been empty for months, and the vape shop was always complaining about low foot traffic. There was no way a new store had opened without me noticing. I stepped closer, peering through the glass. The store looked like something out of a museum. Wooden shelves packed with vinyl records, antique radios, and old-fashioned telephones. A gramophone sat in the corner, its needle spinning, the source of the warped music. The air smelled of dust and wax, and the light flickered like candlelight, though I couldn't see any candles. Behind the counter stood a woman, maybe in her 60s, wearing a high-necked dress that looked like it belonged in the 1940s. Her hair was pinned up in tight curls, and she was polishing a brass radio with a cloth, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the empty mall. She didn't look up. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The music grew louder, the notes twisting into something that made my head ache. "Ma'am, the mall's closed. You shouldn't be here." She still didn't respond, just kept polishing, her hands moving in the same slow rhythm. I glanced around, my flashlight beam catching on the shelves. The records were old, their covers faded, with titles in languages I didn't recognize. The radios were ancient, with dials and knobs that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. And then I saw the photographs, black and white pictures framed on the walls, showing people in old-fashioned clothes, smiling stiffly. One caught my eye, a group of mall employees, their uniforms dated, standing in front of a store that looked exactly like this one. The caption read Pine Ridge Mall, opening day 1963. My stomach twisted. The mall was built in 1992. "Ma'am, you need to leave," I said, louder this time, stepping toward the counter. She stopped polishing and looked up, her eyes pale and watery, like she hadn't slept in years. "You're here," she said, her voice soft but sharp like a needle. "You finally came." I froze. "What?" "You're late," she said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've been waiting." She gestured to the back of the store, where a curtain hung over a doorway I hadn't noticed. The music stopped abruptly and the silence was worse, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I heard footsteps behind the curtain, slow and shuffling, like a crowd moving closer. I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "I'm not supposed to be here," I said, more to myself than to her. She tilted her head, her smile widening. "But you are, and now you stay." The curtain twitched and I saw shapes moving behind it. Tall, thin figures, too many to count, their outlines wrong, like they weren't fully human. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I turned and ran, the floorboards groaning under me. The store seemed to stretch, the door getting farther away with every step. The air grew colder, the smell of dust replaced by something sharp and metallic, like blood. I could hear the footsteps behind me, faster now, and whispers. Dozens of voices, overlapping, saying my name. "Daniel, Daniel, stay." I reached the door and stumbled into the corridor, slamming the gate down behind me. The music started again, louder, chasing me as I sprinted back to my store. I locked myself inside, barricading the door with a display stand, and called security on my radio. "There's someone in the West Wing," I panted. "A store, it's not supposed to be there." The guard on the other end sounded confused but said he'd check it out. When he called back 10 minutes later, he said there was nothing. No store, no music, just an empty space where I'd seen Melody's Emporium. I quit the next day. I didn't care about the paycheck or the 2 weeks' notice. I couldn't go back. A few weeks later, I met up with Raj for a beer, and when I told him what happened, he went pale. He said he'd heard stories from the older guards about a store that used to be in the mall, back in the 60s, before it burned down in a fire. They said it was a record shop, run by a woman named Melody, and that it was cursed, trapping anyone who stayed too long. The mall was rebuilt in the 90s, but some of the old-timers swore the store never really left. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know it wasn't a hallucination. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear that warped music in my head and I swear I see her face in the corner of my eye, smiling, waiting. I avoid malls now, and if you ever find a store that doesn't belong, don't go inside. You might not come out. Story 5. The Voice in the Vents. My name is Chloe, and I was a 22-year-old college dropout scraping by as a janitor at the Willow Creek Mall. It wasn't glamorous, mopping floors, emptying trash cans, cleaning up spills in the food court, but it was steady work, and I needed the money to afford my tiny apartment. The mall was a massive, shiny complex, all glass and chrome, with 3 floors of stores and a central atrium that echoed with chatter during the day. At night, though, when the shoppers left and the lights dimmed, it felt like a different place. Empty, hollow. That's when I heard the voice in the vents, and it's why I'll never work in a mall again. It was a freezing January night and I was on the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The mall was locked up tight, the gates down, the main lights off. I was alone, pushing my cleaning cart through the 2nd floor corridor, the wheels squeaking against the tiles. My earbuds were in, playing a podcast to keep me company, but I kept the volume low. You had to stay alert in a place this big. Sometimes kids snuck in to mess around, or homeless folks slipped through a loose door looking for warmth. I didn't mind the quiet, though. It was peaceful in a way. I was mopping near the sporting goods store when I heard it, a faint whisper, like someone talking just out of earshot. I pulled out an earbud, pausing my podcast. The sound was coming from the air vent above me, a metal grate set into the ceiling. It wasn't unusual for the vents to carry noises, air conditioning, creaking pipes, even the occasional mouse. But this was different. It was a voice, soft and rhythmic, like someone reciting something. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I stood under the vent, tilting my head to listen. The voice stopped, and for a moment there was nothing but the hum of the mall's systems. Then it came again, clearer this time. "Chloe, help me." My blood ran cold. I lived alone, didn't talk much about myself at work, and sure as hell hadn't told anyone my name that night. I backed away, my mop clattering against the cart. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing down the empty corridor. No answer, just the faint hum of the vents. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe one of the security guys was messing with me. They'd done it before, banging on walls to spook the newbies. But the voice didn't sound like them. It was too soft, too wrong. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and radioed the security desk. "Hey, Mike, you hearing anything weird on the second floor?" Static crackled, then Mike's voice came through groggy. "Nah, Chloe, it's dead quiet down here. You okay?" I hesitated, then said, "Yeah, just checking." I didn't want to sound crazy. I kept working, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every few minutes, the voice would start again, always from a different vent, always saying my name. "Chloe, please, I'm here." It was a woman's voice, young, maybe my age, but it had a strange quality, like it was being filtered through water or static. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work, but my hands were shaking as I scrubbed a stain near the escalators. Around 2 a.m. I was cleaning the women's restroom near the atrium when the voice got louder, more insistent. "Chloe, you have to find me. I'm trapped." This time, it was coming from the vent above the sinks. I stared at the grate, my reflection distorted in the polished metal. The air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, and the lights flickered for a second. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed onto the counter, shining the beam into the vent. The light caught on something, a glint of metal, maybe a piece of jewelry, stuck in the slats. I reached up, my fingers brushing the cold grate, and that's when the voice screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was high-pitched, piercing, like a machine screeching mixed with a woman's wail. I fell off the counter, landing hard on the tile, my flashlight rolling away. The lights in the bathroom went out, plunging me into darkness. The scream stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere. "You're too late. You're too late." I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my cart and running out of the bathroom, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The corridor was dark now, the emergency lights barely glowing. I fumbled for my walkie-talkie, but it was dead. No static, no power, nothing. The voice was still there, following me, coming from every vent I passed. "Chloe, why didn't you help me?" I ran toward the service stairs, the ones that led to the basement where the security office was. My cart tipped over, spilling cleaning supplies, but I didn't stop. I just kept running, the whispers growing louder, more voices joining in, a chorus of accusations. When I reached the stairs, I heard something else, a scraping sound like metal dragging on metal, coming from the vents above. I glanced up and saw something moving inside the grate, a shadow that wasn't quite human, too long and thin, its limbs bending at wrong angles. I froze, my breath hitching, as two pale eyes appeared in the darkness of the vent, staring down at me. They weren't human eyes. They were too big, too bright, glowing like a cat's caught in a flashlight. I bolted down the stairs, taking them two at a time until I reached the basement. The security office was locked, but I pounded on the door until Mike opened it, his face pale. "Jesus, Chloe, what's wrong?" I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled, vents, voices, eyes. He sat me down, gave me water, and said he'd check the cameras. When he pulled up the footage from the second floor, there was nothing. Just me, standing under the vent, staring at nothing, then running like a maniac. The cameras didn't pick up the voice or the shadow. Mike walked me to my car at the end of my shift, but I could still hear the whispers faint, like they were embedded in my head. I quit the next day, took a job at a diner instead. I thought that was the end of it, but a few weeks later, I saw a news article online. A woman had gone missing at Willow Creek Mall a year before, a janitor named Emily, my age. They found her name tag in the ventilation system, wedged deep in a duct, but no trace of her body. The article said she'd been working the night shift, alone, when she vanished. I don't know what I heard that night, but I know it knew my name. And sometimes when I'm in a quiet room, I swear I hear it again, whispering through the walls, asking why I didn't help. I stay away from malls now, and I keep my windows closed at night. You never know what might be listening through the vents. Story 6. The reflection in the window. My name is Ethan, and I was 24, working as a sales associate at a high-end jewelry store in the Galleria Mall. The place was upscale, marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and stores selling things I could never afford. I'd been there for a year, charming customers into buying overpriced watches and necklaces to hit my sales quotas. The job was fine, the mall was fancy, and nothing ever seemed out of place. That is, until the night I saw something in the display window that wasn't me. After that, I swore I'd never work retail again. It was a rainy Friday in March, and the mall was closing at 10 p.m. It had been a slow day, with only a handful of customers browsing, so I was stuck reorganizing display cases to kill time. By 9:30, the mall was nearly empty, the corridors quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the glass roof. My manager, Lisa, had left early for a date, leaving me to close up. I didn't mind. Closing was easy, just locking cases, setting the alarm, and pulling down the gate. I was wiping fingerprints off the front window when I first noticed it. The window faced the main corridor, reflecting the dim lights of the mall and my own tired face. But as I polished the glass, something moved in the reflection, something behind me, inside the store. I spun around, expecting to see a customer or maybe a security guard, but the store was empty. The display cases gleamed under the spotlights, the jewelry sparkling, but there was no one there. I turned back to the window, and that's when I saw it again, a figure standing just behind my reflection, where no one should have been. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a dark suit that looked too big for him, like it was hanging off a skeleton. His face was blurry, like a smudged photograph, but his eyes were sharp, bright, almost glowing, staring right at me through the reflection. My heart skipped a beat, and I whipped around again, my cloth dropping to the floor. Nothing. Just the empty store, the soft hum of the air conditioning, and my own ragged breathing. I laughed it off, or tried to. Long hours, bad lighting, and too much coffee could make you see things. I picked up the cloth and went back to cleaning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced at the window, I expected to see him again, but it was just me, pale, sweaty, and looking more freaked out than I wanted to admit. I finished cleaning, locked the cases, and headed to the back to set the alarm. That's when I heard the tapping, soft, deliberate, like someone rapping their knuckles on glass. It was coming from the front of the store. I froze, my hand on the alarm panel. The tapping came again, faster this time, insistent. I grabbed my phone, ready to call security, but the screen was frozen, the time stuck at 9:47 p.m. I shook it, tapped it, but nothing worked. The tapping grew louder, more urgent, and I realized it wasn't coming from outside the store. It was coming from inside the window. I crept back to the sales floor, my pulse hammering in my ears. The window looked normal at first, reflecting the corridor's dim lights and the rain streaking down the glass roof above. But then I saw him again, clearer this time. He was standing in the reflection, right behind me, his blurry face closer now, his mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, and I could see his hands moving, tapping on the glass from the inside like he was trapped in the reflection itself. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of bracelets, the metal clattering loudly. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer, just the tapping, faster now, like a drumbeat. I ran to the window, slamming my hands against it, hoping to scare him off or break whatever illusion this was. The glass was cold, colder than it should have been, and my breath fogged it up. When the fog cleared, he was gone. But there was something else in the reflection. The store behind me wasn't my store. The display cases were there, but they were old, rusted, the jewelry replaced with broken watches and tarnished chains. The walls were cracked, the lights flickering, and the air in the reflection looked hazy, like smoke. I turned around, expecting to see the same decay, but my store was fine. Clean, bright, normal. I looked back at the window, and the reflection was back to normal too, just me and the empty corridor. But my hands were shaking, and I could still hear the tapping, faint now, coming from somewhere deeper in the store. I grabbed my keys and headed for the gate, desperate to get out. But as I reached the front, the lights in the store flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. The emergency lights didn't kick on, and the only illumination came from the corridor outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The tapping started again, louder, and now it was coming from the display cases. I fumbled with the gate's lock, my hands slick with sweat, but the key wouldn't turn. It was like the lock was fighting me, twisting out of alignment every time I got close. Then I heard a voice, low, raspy, like it was coming from inside my head. "Look at me, Ethan." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone my name that night, not even Lisa. I turned slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and saw him standing in the middle of the store. Not a reflection this time. Real, solid, his suit hanging off his bony frame, his face still blurry except for those glowing eyes. He was smiling, his mouth too wide, his teeth sharp and uneven. I screamed and threw the flashlight at him, but it passed right through, shattering a display case. Glass rained down and the figure vanished, the lights flickering back on. The store was normal again, except for the broken case and the scattered jewelry. The tapping stopped, but the voice lingered, whispering my name over and over, echoing in my skull. I finally got the gate open and ran, not stopping until I was in the parking lot, rain soaking me to the bone. I called in sick the next day and quit by email. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not even my roommate, who thought I was just stressed. But a week later, I saw a post on social media from another mall employee, a guy who worked at the shoe store. He'd posted a blurry photo of the Galleria's main corridor at night, complaining about weird vibes and a figure he swore he saw in a window. The comments were full of people saying they'd seen it too, a man in a suit, always in reflections, always watching. I don't know what he was, but I know he wanted me to see him. And sometimes when I pass a mirror or a shop window, I catch a glimpse of something behind me, something tall, thin, and smiling. I don't look too long. I don't want to see what happens if I do. Story 7, The Child Who Followed. My name is Rachel, and I was 27, working as a cashier at a toy store in the Maple Grove Mall. It was a bright, cheerful place during the day, filled with kids running around, parents buying birthday gifts, and the constant jingle of cartoonish music from the displays. I liked the job. It was hectic but fun, and I got to see kids light up when they found the perfect toy. The mall itself was a busy, modern complex, with wide corridors and a massive fountain in the center that kids loved to toss coins into. But after what happened one night in December, I can't even drive past a mall without feeling sick. It was the holiday season and we were swamped. The store was open until 10 p.m. to handle the Christmas rush, and I was stuck on a closing shift. By 9:45, the mall was clearing out, the crowds thinning to a few last-minute shoppers. My coworker, Mia, had left early to catch a flight, so I was alone, restocking shelves and counting the register. The store was a mess, toys scattered on the floor, wrapping paper everywhere. But I was used to it. I was humming to myself, trying to stay awake when I heard a giggle. It was soft, like a kid trying to hide their laughter. I smiled at first, thinking some child had wandered in, maybe hiding behind the stuffed animal aisle. "Hey, kiddo, we're closing soon," I called, walking toward the sound. The giggle came again from the back of the store near the action figures. I checked the aisles, expecting to see a little boy or girl clutching a toy, but they were empty. The store was brightly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing, but the silence felt heavy, like the air was holding its breath. I shrugged it off and went back to the register, but then I heard it again. A giggle, closer this time, right behind me. I spun around, my heart jumping, but no one was there. Just rows of dolls and board games, their plastic eyes glinting under the lights. "Okay, this isn't funny," I said, louder than I meant to. My voice echoed and the giggle stopped. I checked the time, 9:55 p.m. I just needed to finish up and get out. As I locked the register, I noticed something in the corner of my eye, a small shadow moving fast across the aisle. I froze, my hands gripping the counter. It was the size of a child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, but it moved too quickly, darting behind a display of remote control cars. I grabbed the store phone to call security, but the line was dead, just a faint hum like static. My cell phone was in my purse, locked in the back room, so I decided to check it out myself. Probably just a kid playing a prank, I told myself, though my stomach was twisting. I walked toward the display, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. "Come on out, sweetie," I said, keeping my voice soft. "You're not in trouble, but you need to go home." No response. I peered around the display, expecting to see a kid crouched there, but the aisle was empty. Then I heard the giggle again, this time from the doll aisle. I moved faster now, my pulse racing. The dolls were lined up on the shelves, their glassy eyes staring straight ahead, their smiles frozen. I hated that aisle, always had. It gave me the creeps even on a good day. There, at the end of the aisle, was a little girl. She was facing away from me, her dark hair tied in pigtails, wearing a red dress with white polka dots. She was holding a doll, rocking it gently, like she was singing to it. "Hey," I said, relieved to find someone. "You can't be here, kid. Where's your mom?" She didn't turn around, just kept rocking the doll, her giggles soft and rhythmic. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed the floor under her. It was wet, like she'd spilled something, a dark puddle spreading around her feet. "Sweetie, are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking now. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but before my hand made contact, she turned. Her face wasn't a child's face. It was pale, too pale, with deep shadows under her eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide, showing tiny, sharp teeth. Her eyes were black, not just the pupils but the entire eyes, like voids. She giggled again, and the sound was wrong, layered, like multiple voices overlapping, high and low at the same time. I screamed and stumbled back, tripping over a toy truck. The girl didn't move, just stood there, clutching the doll, her head tilting slowly to one side. The puddle under her was growing, and I realized it wasn't water. It was thick, dark, and smelled like copper. Blood. I scrambled to my feet, running for the front of the store, but the lights flickered, and the giggles followed me, echoing from every corner. I reached the gate, fumbling with the keys, but they slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor. When I bent to grab them, I saw her reflection in the glass door. She was right behind me, her black eyes locked on mine, her doll dangling from one hand. But when I turned, she wasn't there. Just the empty store, the toys scattered, the lights flickering again. I grabbed the keys and unlocked the gate, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. The giggles were louder now, coming from all around, and I could hear tiny footsteps, like she was circling me. I ran into the corridor, slamming the gate shut behind me. The mall was dark, the emergency lights casting long shadows. I sprinted toward the main exit, my breath coming in gasps, the giggles chasing me down the hall. I swore I saw her in every storefront window I passed, her red dress, her pigtails, her black eyes reflecting in the glass. The fountain in the atrium was still running, the water glinting under the dim lights, and for a moment I thought I saw her standing in it, her dress soaked, her doll floating beside her. I made it to my car in the parking lot, locked the doors, and drove home, crying the whole way. I quit the next day, didn't even go back to pick up my last paycheck. A few weeks later, I saw a news report about a missing girl from the Maple Grove Mall, a 5-year-old who'd vanished during the holiday season the year before. Her parents said she'd been playing near the toy store when they lost sight of her. The police never found her, but they did find a red polka dot dress in a storage closet, stained with something they couldn't identify. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know it wasn't human. Sometimes when I'm in a store or near a fountain, I hear that giggle again, soft and distant, and I feel those black eyes watching me. I avoid toys now, especially dolls, and I'll never step foot in a mall again, not after what followed me out of that store. Story 8. The escalator that never ends. My name is Alex and I was 29, working as a maintenance technician at the Starlight Mall. It was a sprawling, multi-level complex with shiny escalators, a glass-domed atrium, and stores that sold everything from designer clothes to cheap electronics. My job was to keep the place running, fixing lights, unclogging drains, and making sure the escalators didn't jam. I'd been there for 5 years, long enough to know every creak and hum of the building. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that escalator one night in April. It's why I left town and never looked back. It was a quiet Wednesday just past midnight. The mall had closed at 10 p.m., and I was doing my usual rounds, checking the escalators for any signs of wear. Most people don't realize how much work goes into keeping those things moving. Motors overheat, steps misalign, and debris gets stuck in the tracks. I was on the second floor, near the food court, testing the main escalator that led to the 3rd level. It was a long, sleek machine, one of the tallest in the mall, with polished metal sides and a soft hum that echoed in the empty corridors. I rode it up, my toolbox clanking at my side, checking for any unusual vibrations. Everything seemed fine, smooth, quiet, no grinding. But when I reached the top, I noticed something odd. The escalator didn't stop. It kept moving, carrying me past the 3rd floor and into a space that shouldn't have existed. The ceiling above was gone, replaced by a dark, cavernous void, the air cold and damp like a basement. The escalator kept climbing, the steps clanking rhythmically, but there was no landing in sight. I froze, gripping the handrail. The mall only had 3 floors. I'd worked here long enough to know that. I looked down, expecting to see the food court below, but it was gone, replaced by a swirling fog that seemed to pulse with faint lights, like distant stars. My heart started pounding, and I hit the emergency stop button on the control panel at my waist. Nothing happened. The escalator kept moving faster now, the steps lurching under my feet. "Hello," I shouted, my voice echoing into the void. No answer. Just the relentless clank of the escalator and a faint whisper, like wind moving through a tunnel. I tried the stop button again, slamming it with my fist, but the machine didn't even slow. I turned to run down the steps, but they were moving too fast, the motion pulling me upward against my will. My toolbox slipped from my hand, tumbling into the fog below, the sound of it hitting something solid echoing back after what felt like forever. That's when I saw the lights. Not the mall's fluorescent glow, but small, flickering orbs floating in the darkness above, like fireflies. They bobbed and weaved, drawing closer, and as they did, I realized they weren't lights at all, they were eyes. Dozens of them, glowing faintly, set in faces that were barely there, pale and featureless except for those staring, unblinking eyes. They hovered just beyond the escalator, watching me, their whispers growing louder, forming words I couldn't understand but felt in my gut. I started to panic, my breath coming in short gasps. I tried to climb the handrails, thinking I could jump off, but they were slick, like they'd been coated in oil. My hand slipped and I nearly fell, catching myself on the steps. The escalator was moving faster now, the steps shaking, the metal groaning like it was about to break apart. The faces were closer, their whispers turning into a low, guttural chant. "Stay, stay, stay." I could feel their eyes on me, cold and heavy, like they were pulling me toward them. I don't know how long I was on that escalator. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together. My legs ached, my hands were raw from gripping the rails, and the air was so cold I could see my breath. Then, out of nowhere, the escalator lurched to a stop. I stumbled forward, nearly falling, and found myself on a platform, a small concrete landing surrounded by darkness. The faces were gone, but the whispers lingered, echoing in the distance. In front of me was a door, rusted and heavy, with no handle, just a faint outline of light around its edges. I pushed against it, my shoulder straining, and it creaked open. Beyond was a corridor, not like the mall's polished halls, but narrow and damp, with walls that looked like they were crumbling. The air smelled of mold and something sharp, like burnt metal. I stepped through, my boots splashing in shallow puddles, and the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but it was gone, just a blank wall like it had never existed. The corridor stretched on, lit by flickering bulbs that buzzed like angry insects. I walked, my heart in my throat, hearing the whispers again, closer now, coming from the shadows. I saw shapes moving just out of sight, tall, thin figures that darted away when I turned to look. My flashlight was in my toolbox, gone with the escalator, so I used my phone, its weak light barely cutting through the gloom. The battery was draining fast, dropping from 80% to 20% in minutes. At the end of the corridor was another door, this one wooden, warped and splintered. I hesitated, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Stay, you belong here." I pushed the door open, expecting another nightmare, but instead I was back in the mall, on the third floor, right where the escalator should have let me off. The lights were on, the corridors quiet, the air warm and normal. I checked my phone, 12:15 a.m. Only 15 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I ran to the maintenance office, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. I radioed my supervisor, Tom, and told him something was wrong with the escalator. He laughed it off, said I was overtired, but agreed to check it in the morning. When he did, he found nothing. No extra floors, no void, just a perfectly normal escalator. My toolbox was at the bottom, dented like it had fallen from a great height, but no one could explain how it got there. I quit that week, moved to a new city, and took a job fixing cars instead. I heard later from a coworker that the escalator had been acting up for years, shutting down randomly, making strange noises. Some of the older maintenance guys said it was haunted, that people had gone missing in the mall back in the 80s, workers who were last seen near that escalator. They never found them. I don't know where I went that night, but I know it wasn't part of the mall. Sometimes when I'm on an escalator or in a dark place, I hear those whispers again, faint and distant, calling my name. I keep moving, keep my eyes forward, because I'm afraid if I stop, I'll end up back on that escalator, climbing into the dark forever. Story 9. The mannequin that moved. My name is Lauren, and I was 25, working as a visual merchandiser at a department store in the Oakwood Mall. My job was to dress mannequins, arrange displays, and make the store look inviting. Basically, to sell the idea of a perfect life through perfectly styled clothes. The mall was a glitzy, upscale place with polished marble floors, a massive skylight, and stores that catered to people with more money than I'd ever see. I loved the creative part of my job, but I hated working late, especially alone. That's when the mall felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. And that's when I saw the mannequin move. It was a warm August night, and I was staying late to set up a fall display. The store closed at 9 p.m. And by 10, the mall was empty, the corridors dark except for the faint glow of security lights. My manager, Claire, had left me with a list of tasks: new outfits for the mannequins, rearrange the window displays, and update the signage. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, and I had my playlist blasting through my earbuds to keep me company. The department store was huge, with rows of mannequins standing like silent sentinels under the fluorescent lights. I was in the women's section, dressing a mannequin in a navy blazer and skirt when I noticed something off. The mannequin next to it, a male figure in a suit, was facing the wrong way. I'd positioned it toward the window that morning, but now it was turned slightly, its blank face angled toward me. I frowned, figuring Claire had moved it before she left. I walked over and adjusted it, the plastic cool under my hands, and went back to my work. 10 minutes later, I heard a faint creak like plastic shifting. I pulled out an earbud and looked around. The store was still, the mannequins frozen in their poses, their empty eyes catching the light. I shook my head, old buildings make noises, right, and kept working. But then I saw it again. The same mannequin, the one in the suit, was turned toward me, its head tilted slightly, like it was watching. My stomach twisted. I just moved it. There was no one else in the store. "Okay, Lauren, you're tired," I muttered, trying to laugh it off. I walked over and turned the mannequin back toward the window, checking its base to make sure it wasn't loose. It was bolted to the floor, solid as a rock. I glanced at the other mannequins, half expecting them to be staring too, but they were all in place, their poses unchanged. I went back to the display, my hands shaking slightly as I adjusted a scarf. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate step like a footfall on the tile. I froze, my heart pounding. The store was locked, the gates down. No one could be in here. I turned slowly, scanning the rows of mannequins. Nothing moved, but the air felt heavier, like someone was standing just out of sight. "Hello?" I called, my voice small. No answer, just the faint hum of the lights. I grabbed my phone to text Claire, but there was no signal, which was weird. The mall had Wi-Fi everywhere. I decided to finish up and get out. I was pinning a skirt to another mannequin when I saw movement in the corner of my eye. The suit mannequin was facing me again, but this time it was closer, standing at the edge of the display area, maybe 10 feet away. I dropped the pins, my breath catching. Its head was tilted further, its blank face somehow expressive, like it was studying me. I backed away, my eyes locked on it, waiting for it to move again. It didn't, but the other mannequins were different now. Some had shifted slightly, their arms angled wrong, their heads turned just a fraction toward me. I ran to the front of the store, my sneakers squeaking on the floor. The gate was still down, the lock secure, but the air was cold, like I'd stepped into a freezer. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling, when I heard another step, closer this time, deliberate. I turned, and the suit mannequin was there, standing in the middle of the aisle, its arms no longer posed but hanging limply, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its face was still blank, but I swear it was smiling, a faint curve in the plastic where there shouldn't have been one. I screamed and bolted for the back room, where the employee exit was. The lights flickered as I ran, casting shadows that moved like living things. I could hear more footsteps now, not just one but many, like a crowd of mannequins shuffling after me. I reached the back room and slammed the door, locking it behind me. The footsteps stopped, but I could hear something else, a low, rhythmic tapping like plastic fingers on glass. I grabbed my phone again, but it was dead now, the screen black despite being fully charged an hour ago. I found the employee exit and pushed through, stumbling into the service corridor. It was dark, lit only by emergency lights, but it was better than the store. I ran toward the parking lot, the tapping following me, echoing off the concrete walls. When I reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, shaking until I could breathe again. I quit the next day, didn't even go back for my stuff. Claire mailed it to me. I tried to tell her what happened, but she thought I was stressed, maybe hallucinating from too many late nights. A few weeks later, I met up with a coworker who'd worked the night shift too. He said he'd seen things in the store, mannequins that weren't where they should be, shadows moving in the windows. He'd heard stories from older employees about a fire in the mall years ago, in the 70s, before it was rebuilt. A display worker had died, trapped in the store, and some said his spirit never left, moving through the mannequins, watching the new hires. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else, but I know that mannequin wasn't just plastic. Sometimes when I'm in a store or passing a display, I feel it. Those blank eyes watching, that faint tap of plastic on glass. I avoid mirrors and windows at night, and I'll never work in a mall again. Whatever was in that store, it knew me, and I'm afraid it's still out there, waiting for me to come back. Story 10. The Lost Arcade. My name is Jamal, and I was 21, working as a tech support guy at an electronics kiosk in the Sunset Plaza Mall. The mall was a relic from the 90s, with faded neon signs, a sticky-floored food court, and an arcade that kids still loved despite its outdated games. My job was simple: fix phone screens, sell chargers, and occasionally help with the arcade machines when they broke down. I didn't mind the late shifts. The mall was quieter then, and I could sneak a few free games after closing. But one night in September, I found an arcade game that wasn't supposed to be there, and it changed everything. It was a Saturday, just past 11 p.m. The mall had closed at 10, and I was finishing up a repair on a cracked iPhone before locking up. The kiosk was near the arcade, a dimly lit corner of the mall with flashing lights and the constant ping of old-school games. I'd always liked the arcade. It reminded me of being a kid, wasting quarters on Pac-Man and Street Fighter. That night it was quiet, the machines powered down except for a faint hum from one in the back. I locked the kiosk and headed to the arcade to check the machines, part of my unofficial duties since the arcade's tech guy was always out sick. The air smelled of popcorn and carpet cleaner, and the neon lights cast a flickering glow over the rows of cabinets. As I checked the machines, I noticed one I didn't recognize, tucked in the far corner behind a claw game. It was an old arcade cabinet, taller than the others, with a cracked screen and a faded sign that read, "Labyrinth of Shadows." The paint was peeling and the joystick looked worn, like it had been used for decades. I frowned. I'd been in the arcade hundreds of times and I'd never seen this machine. It wasn't on the repair list, and the mall hadn't gotten any new games in months. Curiosity got the better of me, so I plugged it in, figuring I'd test it before reporting it to my boss. The screen flickered to life, showing a pixelated title card, a dark maze with glowing eyes in the shadows. The words "Insert Coin" pulsed in red, but there was no coin slot. I pressed the start button and the screen changed, displaying a single word: play. The game began without warning, the speakers crackling with static. It was a maze game, like Pac-Man but darker, with a tiny sprite navigating corridors filled with shadowy figures that moved too smoothly for 8-bit graphics. The joystick was stiff, but the sprite moved with my inputs, dodging the shadows as they closed in. The music was eerie, a low drone that vibrated in my chest, nothing like the usual arcade jingles. As I played, I noticed something weird. The maze on the screen looked familiar, too familiar. The layout was exactly like the Sunset Plaza Mall, with corridors branching off in the same pattern, the food court in the center, even the arcade in the corner. I paused, my hands hovering over the controls. The sprite on the screen stopped moving, but the shadows didn't. They turned, their pixelated eyes locking onto the sprite, onto me. I heard a sound behind me, a faint shuffle like someone moving in the dark. I spun around, but the arcade was empty, the other machines dark and silent. The neon lights flickered, casting long shadows across the carpet. I turned back to the game and the sprite was gone, replaced by a first-person view, like I was inside the maze. The screen showed a corridor that looked exactly like the one outside the arcade, down to the scuff marks on the tiles. My heart started pounding. I tried to unplug the machine, but the cord was stuck, like it was fused to the outlet. The screen flickered and words appeared. "Keep playing, Jamal." My breath caught. I hadn't entered my name, hadn't told anyone I was here. I hit the start button to quit, but the game didn't stop. The view moved forward, the shadows on the screen growing closer, their shapes less pixelated now, more human with long limbs and glowing eyes. I backed away, but the arcade felt wrong. The other machines were off, their screens black, but I could hear them humming, like they were alive. The air was cold and the neon lights were dimming, the shadows stretching across the walls. I ran to the arcade's entrance, but the gate was down, locked tight, even though I hadn't touched it. I banged on it, shouting for security, but my voice echoed back, swallowed by the hum of the machines. The game was still playing, the drone louder now, mixed with whispers, my name over and over in voices that weren't human. I turned back to the cabinet and the screen showed me, my face pixelated but unmistakable, standing in the arcade. The shadows were behind me on the screen, closer now, their hands reaching out. I spun around, expecting to see them, but the arcade was empty, or so I thought. Then I saw it, a shadow moving in the reflection of a nearby machine's screen, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed like the ones in the game. It wasn't on the screen, it was behind me in the real world. I screamed and ran to the back of the arcade where there was a service door. The whispers followed, growing louder, and I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, like the shadows were walking in time with the game's music. I reached the service door and yanked it open, stumbling into a dark corridor. The air was thick, smelling of dust and something sour, like old blood. The door slammed shut behind me and the whispers stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it made my ears ring. I used my phone's flashlight, the beam shaking in my hand, and saw that the corridor wasn't part of the mall. The walls were concrete, cracked and stained, with no signs or exits, just an endless tunnel stretching into the dark. I walked for what felt like hours, the whispers starting again, faint at first, then louder, chanting my name. My phone battery drained to nothing, the flashlight dying, leaving me in darkness. I kept moving, feeling my way along the walls until I saw a faint light ahead, a door, glowing faintly, like the one in the game. I pushed it open and found myself back in the arcade, standing in front of the labyrinth of shadows machine. The screen was black now, the words "Game Over" pulsing in red. I ran out of the arcade, through the open gate, and didn't stop until I was in my car. It was 11:30 p.m. Only 30 minutes had passed, but it felt like a lifetime. I quit the next day, didn't even go back to get my tools. A week later, I heard from a coworker that the arcade machine had been removed. No one knew by whom. The older employees said the mall had a history, people going missing, strange games appearing and disappearing. They called it cursed, said it was built on bad land. I don't play arcade games anymore. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that maze, those shadows reaching for me, and I hear my name in their voices. I stay away from malls, from anything that hums like those machines. Because I know deep down that game isn't over. It's still playing, waiting for me to put in another coin.